Welcome back to the Reedman Report, where we talk about risk, AI, security, and education. And all of those come together in the absolutely crazy online social media, algorithmic media world that we have right now. And last week, I woke up to a bunch of unread messages on my phone from Alessandra. And when I looked at the first one, she said, "We're going viral." So I want to talk about where we were going viral, why we were going viral, and welcome Alessandra back to the third episode of the podcast, where we're going to get into what used to be the dark corners of the internet, but now are right there for all of us to see. How are you doing today, Alessandra?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me back under these circumstances.
Yeah, I was a little worried when I first saw those messages. Well, first I was excited because I'm like, oh, okay, maybe our one of our podcast episodes, caught fire, has 1 million views. Some TikToker is playing it. But then when I read through the messages, you're like, no, we're showing up in a lot of the TCC dialogue.
Mhm.
Where and when did you see that, and kind of how did this happen?
Um, so it was kind of a jump scare for me, to be honest, because I have my sock puppet accounts and I follow a lot of accounts, and I was just scrolling on my basically like news feed on Tumblr, and then there was my face. So I was like, oh, and it was a screenshot from my LinkedIn. And I guess what happened, based on reading the comments over the last couple of days, was that someone Googled TCC because they wanted to know what came up, and our podcast was the first thing that had come up. And then they looked my name up, and LinkedIn had changed settings, I guess. I had originally been under the impression you had to have a LinkedIn profile to see things, but it was completely public. So they looked through it and were very offended by some of the things that I had posted. Specifically, most offended by a post that I made about the Tumblr Ridge shooter. And all of them, well, not all of them, but this group of them on Tumblr saying that they don't think he's cute and there's no way that anybody is going to like him. So I was off. And then most of the comments just said that I was insufferable. And there were some other ones that were wild, saying that I had a deprogramming cult and I was trying to recruit kids there. That it's going to be my fault that kids are going to kill themselves because we're taking their safe space away by exposing the TCC and things like that.
Yeah, so to kind of unpack a couple different points there, I think it's first really interesting that yes, LinkedIn is totally open. And unless your posts are specifically set to be only your network or only your connections, they'll show up in search. And I think that this traces back to just the evolution of social media and algorithmic media. Because LinkedIn was like your public resume for a while. And then like all the other companies, they see that there's an opportunity for ads, there's an opportunity for premium accounts. And what's become the center of LinkedIn is then the news feed, just like any of the other algorithmic media apps. And when Twitter went through the Elon transformation, got rid of the blue check mark accounts, got rid of a lot of the mainstream media and political accounts and other things, people left that. There was no way to verify if an account was real or not. I've seen in the last 18 months, LinkedIn basically become the new Twitter. It's a place where there's account verification. You can click on somebody's account, see how many connections they have, see where they work, see where they worked before, see their experience. And you now have a way to decide if kind of people are credible sources or not. Because somebody where their job title is, CEO, expert in U.S. military strategy, and you look and they have 11 connections and like no work history. It's like, oh yeah, this is a bot account, and you can delete and block. So it's been this weird thing where they go and they find your LinkedIn, because now LinkedIn is like the social media place for truth and validation.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I don't mind that they found it. I just was a little concerned of the permanency because with Tumblr, if people reblog it, it never goes away, even if the person's account is deleted. But I don't know. And of course, it was, I felt a little sad because I do see other people speak about the TCC in a fear mongering way. And one of my biggest like advocacy points is advocating that most of the people in the TCC are not inherently dangerous. They're more of a danger to themselves, like they may hurt themselves or self harm, suicidal ideation, or be at risk for being groomed into like 764, things like that, and that a small percentage go on to do targeted violence. Um, but, just like anyone else, if they have been in the shadows or they feel that they've been in the shadows for a long time and now it's coming more to the surface and platforms have banned a lot of their accounts or the hashtags or anything else. So I think it all just comes from a place of fear that their community is going to be taken away from them again. Because the ones who were the most upset are not profiles that I've ever seen posting like concerning things necessarily. So, you know.
What what would a normal day in your TCC news feed look like?
um a lot of edits of perpetrators where it's like cutesy, there's little hearts, there's like music in the background. They'll also have ones where it's like the Vigil AI of the perpetrator dancing with the um, negative, however many victims there are. Some of them are just info posts. Some of them are memes, and it kind of just varies all over the place. It's less common seeing posts where I'm like, oh God, that's bad. That's leakage. Um, but that does come up sometimes. Um, but, a lot of it is just like any other kind of fandom where there's a lot of memes and inside jokes and, they feel like it's a community.
And I think that that community is kind of even more in the spotlight this week or over the last 3 weeks as the Appalachia school shooter's father has been on trial in Georgia. So, in that case, for anybody that doesn't remember, this was a mass shooting at a high school in rural Georgia. The perpetrator was 14 years old. His parents had a really troubled relationship. They were divorced. He was living with his dad. His mom lived out of state. His siblings were elsewhere. Um, he had been taken or contacted by social services 6 different times, and he'd attended 5 different schools prior to this attack. And his father, in an attempt to bond with his depressed and suicidal and serially online 14-year-old son, bought him an AR-15 for Christmas that he had constant access to. And then he committed this shooting at the school. And even though Georgia is not a state that requires safe storage or keeping guns away from kids, the father's been charged with manslaughter and about 30 other felony counts related to the mass shooting at the high school. But what's been interesting is in court, they've been presenting all of this evidence showing that the father should have known there was a problem and didn't take action. And I think you had a great post the other day kind of explaining the connections of what the father should have seen to TCC and some other radicalization behaviors. Could you kind of go over some of that?
Yeah, whenever the case first came out, I remember because the TCC, they'll find a lot of stuff if it wasn't posted online. And I remember someone had leaked a selfie of the perpetrator, and in the background, I could see on the wall pictures of other perpetrators. And since the father has been in court, they released more photos of his bedroom, and above his computer was multiple photos of the Parkland shooter taped to his wall. like a lot. And that's something that I advocate pretty heavily, that we need to like know the names and faces of perpetrators, because this is a leakage that I often wonder. So prior to the actual shooting happening, law enforcement came to his house because they had a tip sent in that he had written something on Discord about wanting to do a shooting. And if the police had gone inside and seen that on the wall, I wonder, could the shooting have been stopped? Would they have known who was on the wall? And like, how could things have been different? Because obviously his dad knew, because in some of the pictures it's a news article, so it says like Parkland shooting on it. So the dad was fully aware. And another thing that I think is interesting is that when the mom was being questioned in court, they specifically asked her about the true crime community, because her son is so popular in it, because they find him very attractive.
Yeah, and I'll include a link in the show notes. That first interview, where just two local patrol officers are sent to the house. The entire body cam of that was released last year. And so I posted a detailed breakdown of that body cam, because we tell people in the violence prevention space, look for warning signs, report those warning signs. That's how you avert shootings. Well, somebody did that. They reported a very clear warning sign. Police went to the house, but in rural Georgia, the patrol officers there had no experience in how to conduct an interview, how to investigate a threat, or how to document the situation. So the whole interaction is absolutely maddening. All 15 minutes of it are available in the link that I have with the breakdown. And these officers, the senior officer has the father and the son on the front porch, and he doesn't let either of them speak. Every time he asks a question, they start to answer. He just jumps in and goes on his own diatribe about how boys will be boys, and we don't want to get anybody in trouble here, and we understand that people online get everything blown out of proportion. These officers botch the clearest, absolutely clearest tip you could have, and all of the warning signs are right there in the way that the father and kid are talking and interacting and being evasive. If they had taken one tiny step to try to investigate, they would stop this whole attack. So I'll include that link. But that's my soapbox on this. If we tell people to pay attention to the warning signs, we tell people to report the warning signs, law enforcement has to take it seriously, and police officers need to have some basic training and experience in how to conduct an interview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. Watching that interview is really maddening. I find the entire case with him specifically maddening, similar to the Oxford shooting with Ethan Crumley, which was the first one where parents were charged, where you see this kid that had so many times reached out for help, and there were so many opportunities for adults to intervene, and they didn't help the child. And both of them were so young when they perpetrated it, like freshly out of middle school, basically. Um, so those two cases specifically, it makes a lot of sense to me why the parents are being charged, and I do think that it's likely that more states will follow suit if there is unsafe storage, because a lot of mass shootings, they have access to weapons beforehand, and a lot of shootings, it's their parents' gun.
Yeah, that's this study of the social pathways of school shootings, which I'll drop the link in also, where 98% of school shooters come from households where firearms are their primary family leisure activity, and 100% of school shooters come from households where guns are either openly accessible or easily accessible to the kids. Um, you did mention in there that these are young high schoolers. These are 14-year-old student at Appalachia, who's a 15-year-old student in Oxford. They both had the same warning signs. Ethan Crumley in Oxford the only thing on the wall of his bedroom was his human shaped shooting range targets.
Yeah.
That's maybe a little red flag there. What what should people know about kind of the preteen, middle school age kind of interactions with TCC, and how accessible is that to um, kids where parents might not be thinking that they're like old enough to be a problem yet?
Oh, I mean, it's accessible to everyone at any age. So, I mean, all you have to do is change the settings and say that you're a specific age. I see different ranges of age all the time on the different. I see membership in the TCC as like different levels of membership. I think the widest level is the people who romanticize perpetrators or they have a crush on them or anything like that. Then we have ones who idolize it where they idolize the violence. But the final one is going to be people who identify, and that is the smallest group, but it's the most dangerous. And so that is where like Ethan and Colt, I think for a long time, of them were more idolizers. And then over time, with all the leakage of their interest and then how to use a firearm as a way to bond with their parents. And both of them, I mean, multiple times had reached out to their parents for help and wanted mental health help. And their parents just did not do that for them. So I think with ones in that age, um, just seeing the signs of like when they're asking for help, but at the end of the day, a lot of the things that are going on at home we just don't see.
So with like the trends that we've seen in TCC, and it feels like there's a stronger connection and there's kind of more escalation in there with kind of minimal information available about Tumbler Ridge, the mass shooting in the rural mountain town in British Columbia. I think that that's kind of an interesting online radicalization case study, because if you're in a town of a couple thousand people where everybody's very close, it's um, a 6 through 12 school that only has like 200 students, kind of everybody's going to know everybody there. The chances of you finding somebody else in your tiny community who can be your confidant in plotting mass violence is very slim.
Mhm.
But what the internet does is it opens the opportunity for people that wouldn't have that confidence. You wouldn't have the Columbine shooters just happen to be there together and be on the same wavelength and able to plot together. Something that's really very rare across school shootings.
Mhm.
What have you seen in terms of the activity that could allow the Tumbler Ridge school shooter to get connected into kind of the radicalization and violence?
I think retreating to things online. I know one of the things that has come out was their YouTube channel that their mother had been promoting, and it was just videos of them with firearms. So finding other people who have an interest in firearms and feeling confident in your use of firearms and then being interested in other perpetrators. I'm not 100% sure if it's been confirmed if they were on Watch People Die or not, but I do suspect that that is pretty likely. I see that as a much more common warning sign now. A lot of exposure to gore content to help desensitize them and things like that. And I know a lot of the warning signs for that one was that they had so many mental health calls to the home, firearms were removed from the home. But then the petition to have them returned.
And I mean, the issue there in Tumbler Ridge is you've got this tiny community. They only had a 5-person detachment of the Royal Mounted Police in that community, and it's everybody knows everybody, and nobody wants to get anyone else hemmed up. And when you're way out in the mountains, and firearms are an important part, and hunting is a big part of the culture there, that nobody, a lot of times somebody in authority wants to kind of leave the governance of that home up to the parent, and that was very clear, like from those Appalachia uh,
Hmm.
interviews where these police officers are just like, oh yeah, these are boys being boys, we're men, we both get this, you're his father, make sure you talk to him, hey son, were you doing anything? Well, officer, oh, okay, that's good, kid, I understand it. That's that's one of the um disconnects I think we have when you have these really robust online worlds combined with a small community where the authority figures in that community don't understand what's happening, and kind of, if they don't have any concept of online radicalization, then they're just gonna dismiss all of this as just, oh yeah, it's just kids being kids.
Yes. Yeah. And especially if they don't have any BTAM training, they've never seen the pathway to violence model, then they're absolutely going to kind of be at a loss. And I think it's important also to acknowledge that planned school shootings like this are rare. And so I think for most people, we have that issue of if it didn't happen here, it's never happened here. So why would we waste time learning and training about this specific thing that's rare that's likely not going to happen? Um, and that is understandable when people are under so much stress and they have so many things on their plate, especially schools and things like that. But at the same time, it is a growing issue, and really important to be able to tell what is actually a threat and what is not, what is an offhanded comment kid online that's been reported or saying something edgy. Because I mean, I see that all the time in the TCC. People wanting to be edgy and like they're not actually a threat. They don't have other leakage, but they're saying things that are shocking and kind of crude. But that doesn't always indicate that there is a threat. Just like someone who uses firearms, that doesn't mean that they're going to do targeted violence, but combined with other behaviors and other signs and other leakage, then it is concerning. And so I think police really learning about leakage and BTAM really, really, really helpful for them to be able to discern and tell the difference between different types.
Yeah, I'd like to get your opinion on that there are not a lot of school shootings that actually happen. But I see a lot of very viable plots and averted attacks and
Yeah.
near misses. In November, there was a TCC connected kind of Columbine mass shooter lore connected um, shooting and bombing in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Mhm.
And the shooter couldn't get a gun there because it's very difficult to get a gun in Indonesia, but had a replica AR-15 that with white Sharpie wrote the names of shooters, used all the symbology, had the same pictures and T-shirts and posts and everything else, and detonated a pipe bomb in the prayer room of their school and seriously injured 96 students. After that, last month, Indonesia's counterterrorism police said that they had arrested 112 different students in Indonesia that were radicalized by TCC and were in the process of plotting different school shootings. And they said 20 of those were viable school shooting plots directly connected to TCC. What do you think when you hear about kind of a wide sweep operation like that in Indonesia, where 112 kids are all getting arrested by your national counterterrorism police force?
Yeah, I mean, as a person who is also undercover in the TCC and I see all the different kinds of membership, hearing about the 20 viable being charged, I wonder what the other ones were like. If it was they were just obsessed with the perpetrator or thought that they were hot, or like what constitutes that, if there's any interest. And so I'd be curious about how they're deciding those things. But I do think that it is really important and great that Indonesia immediately identified there was an issue, especially when it's not an issue that's native to their country or even like native language or native, like the letters even are different. Like we don't even share the same alphabet because perpetrator, he had on a natural selection shirt. And then the writing on his gun was all in English. And he also had written stuff on his desk. And from what I understand, he tried to use the gun to shoot himself at the end, but was not successful and then woke up in the hospital and is now being charged.
Yeah, I wonder about that because something that I've seen in various internet forums is there are ways to modify a toy or an airsoft gun to fire a 22 round. And I mean, it doesn't need to be a secret because it's all out there.
Yeah.
But you can really probably only fire 1 or 2 rounds before it's going to destroy the gun because it's not built to fire an actual bullet. There was a mass shooting at a mall in Thailand where it was an airsoft Glock pistol that had been modified to fire 22 rounds. And then we saw that also here in Madison, Wisconsin, where there was a 12-year-old student who was obsessed with school shootings. He resented that his family didn't have any guns in the house because he really wanted them. And he bought an airsoft gun. And even though police never kind of gave details on that, in the evidence report that was released, there was the airsoft gun and there was 122 bullet. So I would guess that was an attempt with this too. But I think what's fascinating about this Indonesia case is not only did it take all of the lore around all of the world mass shootings and all the U.S. mass shootings in TCC, but the reaction there was so different. I did an interview on Indonesia's national news, and I think I got better, more in-depth questions from the reporter there than almost any reporter here in the U.S. Has. What do you see when you're looking at TCC content from folks that are international? Is there any difference? Are you able to tell?
You can tell sometimes because of the perpetrators that they're putting their international perpetrators only, especially whenever it's TCC people from Russia. A lot of European countries and UK, they're all very obsessed with American ones. And then for people who are from Brazil and Mexico, they like the more South American ones and then will pick some of the American ones. But I even see it with different Asian accounts where they are I see a lot more cosplaying as perpetrators where they're dressing up and then they're like reenacting scenes from Zero Day or things like that, that I can tell is a little bit more unique to theirs. I know that there have been 2 girls who killed themselves in the TCC on live stream. One American, the other was in Bangladesh, and they both were young. And that happened pretty recently. So both of those things are very sad as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's this strong connection between suicidality and mass violence. And I think that it's a big problem that we don't focus more on this. It's not a school shooting. It's not a mass shooting. It's a violent public suicide.
Yeah.
It's radicalization towards the purpose of self-harm.
Yeah.
Whether that's social isolation, whether that's extremist behavior that's incompatible with society, whether it's hurting yourself, whether it's being exploited, or whether it's committing mass violence or trying to get others. If we take this idea of, oh, these are just these fringe monsters away who like can't be saved, these are just evil people, that detracts from our ability to realize that no, these are people that are hurting.
Yeah. Yeah.
In TCC, what's kind of the mix of different people from kind of the posts from different accounts between, like, if you had to kind of break down rough percentages between people that are just kind of curious lurkers, people that are trying to kind of get some attention, and then people that are actually like kind of I know they're not account managers or supervisors, but the influencers within it. What's the tier and breakdown of, or are there other types of TCC members or adjacents?
There definitely is a lot of people that lurk, obviously. What I know is most people that I've seen who are lurking, they either don't have friends in the community and they're kind of newer to the community, or they are adults that feel like they've kind of aged out, even if they're only like 19. Because they're like, everybody on here is so young, like everybody calls me Unc. And I see that across, even when I look back to posts from like 2015, people saying that as well, of like, oh my God, I think I'm too old or whatever. So I do see the lurking in that way. And I would say that honestly, when I think of the TCC, I think of it as any other large group where there's the umbrella term of TCC, and then there's all these small factions. So within the smaller subset, there might be someone that is pretty popular. But then when I go to a different side of the TCC, even if it's the same type where they're romanticizing the perpetrators, if they haven't had any overlap, because the accounts get banned so frequently, you can't have like really prolific influencers on the website. There have been a couple that have made original content that's memes, that people find really funny, and so people remember them. Or if they make a lot of fan art, that is very good artwork, then people will remember those people. Other people who have gone viral, but not for a good reason, are people who have tried to do attacks and they've announced it online before and then they failed and then everyone made fun of them. But yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot of moderators. Most people, they're not using their real names. If you look at their stories, a lot of times that's when they're going to be revealing their face, but not in their actual posts. So it's only temporary. But yeah, I would say that's a lot of what it is.
And then you've also been advocating, and you mentioned a couple times here, that the behavioral threat assessment process, the BTAM process, needs to account for TCC activity and kind of the nuances within it. And you're working on a framework for that. To give people context, this kind of threat assessment framework came out of work right after Columbine. And obviously, the world was very different in the 2000s, pre social media, much different again when we started to have the early algorithmic newsfeed, social media, and then has changed completely now that we have the deregulated kind of post trust and safety social media. So what are the key things that you think need to be incorporated and included into a threat assessment model to more accurately capture some of this activity?
I think that they do a really good job already of like identifying leakage that is pretty concerning. It's more, I've seen a lot of cases for kids who they have an interest or they make a one-off comment or they think a perpetrator is cute and then someone finds out and it gets reported to the school. The school has a no tolerance, and then they are kicked out when they never were planning mass violence. And what that does is isolate them and actually give them a grievance, which could end up having them want to do an attack that could help them move from one thing to another. So, a lot of what I really want people to know with the model that I'm making is being able to discern more of like what isn't necessarily a immediate threat or something to be super concerned about, but something to monitor. Um, Although it may be disturbing to a lot of people, if someone finds one of the Columbine shooters cute, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to do any kind of mass violence. A lot of the people in the TCC who are there and they just romanticize the perpetrators, they have a parasocial relationship with them, and like they are very open about not condoning the violence that the perpetrator did. They're really interested in the person before the attack. And that is the biggest group of membership that I see. And I also think it's really important that we don't waste a lot of time and resources on things like that so that they can focus more on credible threats. and people who are condoning violence and want to carry out violence and have the interest in guns and all the other kinds of leakage. So just have a little bit more education on the other aspects is a lot of what I'm doing. But one of the main things that I think is really important that I advocate a lot in the trainings that I do is that this generation has grown up on Chromebooks and they've grown up online. So if they're already having warning signs and leakage and all of a sudden they start writing in a handwritten journal, that is a concern.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that previously, that there's been a desire to return to the 1990s for some of the shooters, and especially we saw that in Nashville, where there were, the marble notebooks and trying to get VHS tapes. Um, what's old is new again. So through your threat assessment process, when you do identify somebody that actually, not that they just think the school shooter is cute, or they enjoy, within the marginalized community, if you feel marginalized and you think these other people are marginalized, they're high profile characters, everybody can kind of coalesce around that feeling that, we were just like them, we were just misunderstood.
Mhm.
Um, but once you do see somebody who's going to that point of violence, what is the pathway and process for de-radicalization, for the work that you do?
One of the main things that we do is focusing on behavioral radicalization, so mobilization for violence, wanting to carry out violence. But as for like cognitive radicalization, trying to change their beliefs, that's not necessarily something that we do because we know once the behaviors have changed that most of the time they start to let the ideology go. So, really focusing on getting them re engaged with the community, spending less time online, helping them hit milestones that help build confidence within them, like getting their license, getting a job, graduating school, getting into college, going to homecoming, all those kinds of things, getting on a team that they want to be on. Those regular milestones for young people are things that we want to support them and help them hit. But one of the caveats is that we have to accept them for where they're at. And a lot of times they're going to test us and they're going to say things that are kind of scary to a normal person who isn't used to this. But testing us to make sure we're not going to leave them. A lot of them, they feel abandoned, they feel rejected. So they may say something really graphic or scary. But once you ask a couple follow up questions, then, you realize that it's a lot more of a projection and a self reflection on them, and they don't feel good about themselves. And, they just expect everybody to leave. So after building rapport and getting buy in and having that trust, that's where we see the real progress happening and helping them get off the pathway to violence, which is really what we want to do. Because once they are doing better in their life and they have more friends and they change their people places and things, they're not holding on to the ideology so much because they have a life that's not worth giving up for something.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about, pathway to violence, and getting somebody back on track with the milestones in a life from graduation to job and so on. And that really aligns with the sociological theory of life course, and that each culture prescribes a specific life course that is the actions that you take at each stage in your life. And there's some pretty interesting research around suicide and life course, that it's when somebody doesn't meet one of those milestones, there's not an alternate path to get there. And I remember a paper about suicide in Japan. And in Japan, a young teenager essentially picks their profession prior to going to high school, and then from that decision forward, everything needs to fall into the right steps from high school to college to that job, and you stay at that same job for your entire life there.
Ugh.
Um, so that's a very high stakes decision, because if then you make a misstep anywhere along the way, then you're never going to have a life. And there's a lot of young kind of adolescent suicide in Japan, because you screw something up in high school, you screw something up in college, you screw something up at the start of your first job, you can't recover because you're never going to be able to get back on the track of the life course. So taking this idea that there are, instead of having a binary of two pathways, of either there's normative step-by-step life course or there's a pathway to violence, I think what we really need to do is make more zigzagging inroads between them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that one of my colleagues who has worked on ISIS cases with me, and her name's Lila Schwartz. She's a psychologist. She's amazing. She worked with a lot of kids in Afghanistan who were defected suicide bombers in the like camps, and she constantly reminded the kids, like, you're allowed to make mistakes. Like, you are allowed to make mistakes. And these are kids who were planning targeted violence. They wanted to do a jihad. And it had, I mean, for myself, that isn't even something I heard a lot. So hearing someone say that over and over to kids also um, resonated with me. And that's something that I take into the work that I do now, where constantly telling the kids, like, you're allowed to make a mistake. Like, that is okay. You're a kid. You're allowed to make mistakes, even if it's a big mistake. You're still allowed to make mistakes. So hearing that about Japan is so sad. As for the life course that you were talking about with Japan, I think it's really important to remind the kids that they're allowed to make mistakes, and people make mistakes as part of their pathway to growing up, even if they are really big mistakes. That, I say a lot of times that kids are redeemable up until the moment that they pull the trigger, even if they bring the gun into the school. Like, they haven't done anything that they can't take back yet. They still need to be held accountable for what they did, and it scared people, but, they haven't killed anyone. So there's, still room to live a pretty normal life.
I think the last thing I want to talk with you about before we get out of here and you get back to your important work tracking the online fringes is, since we did go kind of viral, or you specifically kind of went viral. I think there were just a couple comments about why is there this random AI PhD that has this surface level database, who doesn't understand us at all, talking about true crime community. But since our content about true crime community will probably make it to members of that community at some point, what is your message to somebody in TCC?
Well, I will say one of the things that's been really great is that because that happened, I have had people who reached out and they want out and they want help. And you are always welcome to reach out to me. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to be scared. I'm not a Fed. I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. Like, I just want to help people. And there is a life on the other side. And, if you don't feel like the community is serving you anymore, that's okay. And you're allowed to ask for help. Like, that doesn't make you weak, doesn't make you bad. And, it's confidential. I'm not going to rat you out to the other members or anything like that. So,
Yeah, I think that's the same message that I would give to school administrators or police or parents, is that zero tolerance discipline when somebody is being radicalized is probably just going to push them further in the wrong directions. And if somebody is going to uh, the internet to try to find belonging and place and understanding and community, it's because they're not getting it somewhere else. And if you take away even more of their real world community, they're just going to get pushed further and deeper into violence. So I'll have Alessandra's contact info in the show notes. Also, the links to our other episodes. We had an in-depth discussion where we went through some of the common memes and things that parents should be on the lookout for, as well as kind of a broader discussion into online radicalization. So, Alessandra, I hope that this one goes viral for the right reasons in some of the big communities. Is there anything else you want to leave people with?
um, that there is hope. I know that things like this is really scary, but I've worked with kids of all different ideologies and I've seen them turn their lives around. And, give back to the community and take accountability. And people in the TCC are no different than anyone else who, they want to turn their life around. So while this is scary, just know that there are people who believe in these kids and want to help them and want to see them succeed. And, you can reach out, and I'm always happy to talk to members of TCC, parents, anything, administrators, law enforcement. If you need information or training, please reach out. I'm happy to talk.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your time. Sadly, this won't be our last discussion about it. But until then, everybody stay safe out there. Thank you.